I still remember that evening, the one that changed everything. I had just finished a long shift, the kind that makes your back ache and your eyes burn. Driving a taxi wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. It kept food on the table, kept a roof over our heads, kept her comfortable, kept her happy, or so I thought. That night, I was working for a new service, driving a car my wife, Lena, had never seen before. It was a sleek black sedan, nicer than my usual ride. I was proud of it in a way. Thought she'd be happy to see me moving up in the world. I was wrong. The call came in just as I was about to call it a night. A pickup from a fancy restaurant across town. I almost ignored it, but the fare was good. Too good to pass up. So I drove over, pulled up to the curb, and waited. A few minutes later, they appeared. A man and a woman, laughing as they stumbled out of the restaurant. She was leaning on his arm, her head tilted back, hair tumbling down her shoulders. She looked radiant, happy. I didn't realize it was her at first. Not until she spoke. "Did you call the car?" she asked, her voice playful, familiar. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. It was Lena, my wife. She didn't even glance at me as they slid into the back seat. Why would she? To her, I was just the driver. Nothing more than a shadow behind the wheel. She was too busy nuzzling up to him, too busy whispering in his ear, laughing at his jokes. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw him out of my car. But I didn't. I just drove, eyes fixed on the road, ears burning as I listened to her giggle, listened to him murmur sweet nothings that she ate up like candy. She didn't recognize me. Didn't even glance in the rearview mirror. I had become invisible to her. I dropped them off at a hotel. Watched as they stumbled out, arms around each other, lips locked in a kiss that made my stomach turn. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. It was like I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I stayed there long after they disappeared inside. Long after the lights in their room flicked on. Long after the shadows moved behind the curtains. I stayed because I couldn't face what was waiting for me at home. The lies, the betrayal, the emptiness. When I finally drove back, the house was dark. Quiet. She wasn't home yet. I sat on the couch, staring at the door, waiting for her to return. When she did, she was glowing, her smile wide and bright. She looked at me, eyes sparkling, and kissed my cheek. "Busy night?" she asked, her voice soft, innocent. I nodded, throat tight, heart heavy. "Yeah, busy." She didn't notice the way my hands were shaking, didn't see the way my jaw clenched as she walked past me, humming to herself, happiness radiating off her. I watched her go, watched her sway down the hallway, watched the door to our bedroom close behind her. And then I knew. I knew I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let her get away with it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, her laughing, her fingers tangled in his hair, her lips pressed against his. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. How long had it been going on? How many nights had she come home with that smile, that glow, after being with him? By morning, my mind was made up. I needed proof. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. If she was lying to my face, if she was making me live in this illusion, then I deserved to see the full, ugly picture. I reached out to an old friend, Victor. He was the kind of guy who could get things done. No questions asked. We went way back to the days when I wasn't just a taxi driver, when I still had ambitions. I hadn't seen him in years, but when I called, he agreed to meet me without hesitation. We met at a cafe on the outskirts of town, a place no one would recognize us. Victor looked the same lean, sharp-eyed, a man who thrived in the shadows. He watched me as I sat down, his gaze calculating. "You look like hell," he said, lighting a cigarette. I forced a smile. Rough night. He didn't press for details. He never did. Instead, he got straight to business. "What do you need?" I leaned in, lowering my voice. "A wiretap. Something I can put on a phone without her knowing. And GPS tracking." His eyes flickered with interest. "You think she's cheating?" My jaw clenched. "I know she is. I just need proof." Victor took a long drag from his cigarette, the smoke curling around his face. "I've got just the thing. It's clean, undetectable. You'll hear everything. See everywhere she goes." He paused, studying me. "You sure you want this?" Once you know, there's no going back. There was no hesitation. I need to hear it for myself. Victor nodded, reaching into his coat pocket. He handed me a small device, no bigger than a matchbox. Slide this into her phone. It'll sync with yours. You'll get every call, every message. And this, he pulled out another tiny chip, goes in her car. Real-time location tracking. I took them, my hands trembling. It felt heavy, like I was holding my future in my palm. How much? He waved me off. Consider it a favor. Just be careful. Sometimes the truth is worse than the lie. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. That night, I waited for Lena to fall asleep. I watched her as she lay there, peaceful, her face serene. It almost felt like a dream, a perfect life with a perfect wife. But I knew better now. I knew the truth hiding beneath that pretty smile. I moved quickly, quietly, slid the wiretap into her phone, careful not to disturb her. Installed the GPS in her car, hidden beneath the dashboard. It felt wrong, invasive. But then I remembered her laughter in the back seat of my taxi, remembered the way she kissed him without a second thought. By the time I was done, my hands were steady. My heart was cold. The first recording came the next day. I listened to it alone in my car, parked on an empty street. Her voice crackled through the speakers, soft and sweet, the way she used to talk to me. But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to him. I miss you already, she whispered, her voice low and tender. Last night was perfect. I can't wait to see you again. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. She was lying to my face, coming home to me after being with him, pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't just her words. It was her voice. The way it trembled, full of excitement and longing. I hadn't heard her speak like that in years. Not to me. I felt the anger rising, hot and sharp, clawing at my insides. I wanted to smash the phone, wanted to scream, to cry. But I didn't. I just sat there, listening to her betrayal, letting it burn into my memory. She had no idea I was listening. No idea her every word was being recorded. She thought she was safe, thought her lies were perfect. She was wrong, and I was going to make her pay. The days that followed were torture. Every time her phone buzzed, every time she smiled at a message, I wondered if it was him. I watched her closely, studying her every move, every word. She was good, too good. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed her act. I became obsessed. Every spare moment, I was listening to the recordings, tracking her location. I heard her laugh, flirt, whisper things that made my skin crawl. I watched as she went to places she never told me about. Cafes, parks, hotels. Always with him. Always smiling. One evening, she told me she was meeting a friend from work for dinner. I smiled, kissed her goodbye, watched her drive away. Then I followed. The GPS made it easy. I knew exactly where she was headed. She didn't go to the restaurant she mentioned. Instead, she pulled into a parking lot behind a small bar on the other side of town. He was waiting for her, leaning against his car, that cocky grin on his face. I stayed hidden, watching as she ran to him, as he wrapped his arms around her, as they kissed like they couldn't stand to be apart. I wanted to get out, to confront them right there. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to see the look on her face when she realized she'd been caught. But I didn't. Not yet. Not like this. I needed more. I needed her to admit it. To confess. I drove away, heart pounding, hands trembling on the steering wheel. The image of them together burned into my mind. But I didn't go home. I couldn't face that empty house, couldn't sit on that couch and pretend everything was fine. Instead, I went to Victor's. I didn't call ahead, just showed up at his door, banging until he opened it. He took one look at me and stepped aside, no questions asked. Inside, I told him everything. About the recordings, about the GPS, about the lies. His face remained expressionless as he listened, but his eyes were dark, calculating. When I finished, he leaned back, crossing his arms. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. "I want her to pay," I said, my voice cold, distant. "I want her to feel what I felt. I want her to hurt." Victor nodded, as if he expected that. "You have proof. You could confront her, divorce her. Take everything." But that wasn't enough. Not after everything she'd done. Not after all the lies, all the betrayal. I want her to suffer, I said, my jaw tight. I want him to suffer too. Victor's lips curve into a faint smile. I thought you might say that. He reached into his desk, pulling out a small device. This will let you record phone calls. Both sides of the conversation. Get her to admit it, get him on tape too. Then you'll have them both. I took it, feeling the cold metal against my skin. It was so small, so simple. But it held so much power. And then you decide what to do with it, Victor said, his eyes sharp, piercing. Ruin her life, ruin his. Let them destroy each other. Or something else. I knew what he meant. I saw it in his eyes, heard it in his voice. Something darker, more permanent. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I left Victor's place feeling lighter, more in control. I had a plan now, a weapon. I was going to make her confess. I was going to make her say it out loud, make her admit to every lie, every betrayal. And when she did, she'd see just how much damage one little secret could do. When I got home, Lena was already in bed, asleep. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, her face relaxed, her hair spread out across the pillow. I stood there, watching her, my heart pounding. I remembered when I used to love that face, when it used to be my whole world. But that was before. Before she tore my heart out, before she lied to me, before she made a fool of me. I looked down at the recording device in my hand, feeling the weight of it. Soon, I'd have the truth. And once I did, there would be no more pretending. No more lies. No more mercy. The first call I recorded was short. She was cautious, keeping her voice low, speaking in vague, careful words. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that it wasn't just some fling. It was an affair. A real, full-blown affair. She called him darling. Her voice was sweet, dripping with affection. She never spoke to me like that anymore. Not for a long time. She laughed softly, teasing him about something trivial, and my chest tightened. She was happy, genuinely happy, with him. I played the recording over and over, memorizing every word, every inflection. I knew her voice better than my own. Knew when she was smiling, when she was blushing, when she was thinking about him. It was sickening, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed her to say more, to confess. The next day, I acted like nothing was wrong. I kissed her goodbye, watched her drive off, then followed her. She went to work, just like she said she would. But during her lunch break, she slipped out, got into her car, and drove to a park across town. He was waiting for her. They sat together on a bench, close, shoulders touching. They looked like a couple in love, like they didn't have a care in the world. I watched from my car, every muscle tense, my hands gripping the steering while so heart hurt. I wanted to storm over, to grab him by the collar, to shout at her, to make a scene. But I stayed put. I needed her to keep believing she was safe. I needed her to keep talking. That night, she came home on time, just like always. She kissed my cheek, asked about my day, laughed at one of my stupid jokes. She was perfect. The perfect wife, the perfect liar. We sat down to dinner, and I watched her closely, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in her facade. There was nothing. She was flawless. I almost admired her for it. Almost. I waited until she was in the shower before I listened to the next recording. It was longer this time. She was more relaxed, her voice warm, affectionate. She called him by his name, Andre. My stomach churned. I finally had a name to go with the voice, the face. Andre. She told him she missed him. Told him she hated lying to me, but that it was worth it. Worth it to be with him. I wish I could just be with you, she said, her voice wistful. No more sneaking around. No more lies. He laughed, low and smooth. Patience, my love. We'll figure it out. My blood ran cold. Figure it out. What were they planning? Was she going to leave me? Were they waiting for the right moment? Waiting until I was out of the picture? I felt sick. This was more than just an affair. This was a betrayal, conspiracy. They were plotting behind my back, making plans for a future without me. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. The next day, I waited until she left for work. I went through her things, searching for anything that would give me more answers. I felt like a stranger in my own home, rifling through her drawers, her bags, her closet. In her purse, I found a second phone, one I'd never seen before. I turned it on, and the screen lit up asking for a passcode. Of course, she was smart enough to keep it locked. But I wasn't about to give up. I tried a few combinations before landing on the date of our anniversary. The phone unlocked. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. She was mocking me, even in this. The messages were all to him. Long, romantic text, photos, plans to meet. It was all there, laid out in black and white. Proof. Proof of every lie she'd ever told me. I saved everything. Every message, every photo. I copied it all to my phone, backing it up twice, just in case. I was building my case piece by piece. That night, I watched her as she slept, her face peaceful, content. She looked like an angel. But I knew better now. She was a devil in disguise. I had enough to confront her, to blow her perfect little world apart. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to hear her say it, to admit it, to confess every filthy detail. And when she did, she'd see just how deep my hatred went. She'd see just how far I was willing to go. I became a ghost in my own home. I moved quietly, watched silently, listened relentlessly. Every word, every whisper, every text, I devoured them all. Lena was careful, but not careful enough. She grew comfortable, confident in her lies, never suspecting that I was recording every conversation, tracking every movement. The next call came late at night. I was in my car, parked down a street, listening through the wiretap. Her voice was soft, tender. She was lying in our bed, talking to him like he was the only person in the world. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," she whispered. "I hate being apart from you." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. She was planning another meeting. Another betrayal. "I wish you were here with me," she continued, her voice tinged with longing. "I miss you." He laughed, low and teasing. "Patience, my love. Soon." There was a pause. Then she sighed, a soft, contented sound. "I love you, Andre." The words felt like a knife to my chest. She hadn't said those words to me in years. I didn't even realize how long it had been until I heard her say them to him. I turned off the recording, my heart pounding, my head spinning. She was in our bed, our home, whispering love to another man. It was like I was already dead to her. I didn't go inside that night. I couldn't. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring around me. I was numb, empty. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. The life we built together, the memories, the promises, it was all a lie. But not for long. I was going to tear it all down, just like she tore me apart. The next day, I went back to Victor. He could see the change in me the moment I walked in. "You look different," he said, his eyes sharp. Colder. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need something more. I need to know where they're meeting tomorrow." He raised an eyebrow. "You going to confront them?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I just need to see it, to hear it." Victor nodded, pulling out a small device. "This'll let you listen in real time. Get close enough, and you'll hear every word." He hesitated, his gaze steady. "You sure you want to do this? There's no going back once you hear it all." I met his eyes, my voice cold, unyielding. "I have to." The next day, Lena left the house dressed casually, like she was just running errands. But I knew better. I watched her from my car, the GPS tracker showing her route. She drove to a cafe on the other side of town, parked in the back, and went inside. Andre was already there, waiting for her. They embraced, their faces lighting up with joy. She looked so alive, so happy. It made me sick. I parked nearby, close enough to use the listening device. Their voices crackled through the speakers, soft at first, then clear. "I thought about you all night," she was saying, her voice low, intimate. "I hate going home to him. It feels wrong, pretending to be his wife when all I want is you." My blood ran cold. She was talking about me like I was some stranger, some obstacle in her way. Like I didn't even matter. Andre's voice was smooth, reassuring. "So my love, just be patient. We'll be together." No more lies, no more hiding. She sighed, leaning her head on his shoulder. I just don't know how much longer I can do this. Every time he touches me, I feel sick. I wish I could just leave. I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me. Every word was another betrayal, another stab in the heart. She was planning to leave me, to throw away our life, our marriage for him. Andre kissed her forehead. We'll figure it out. We'll find a way. I promise. I listened to every word, every whisper, letting the poison seep into my veins. I wanted to storm in there, to drag her out, to make her confess right then and there. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed her to keep talking, to keep revealing her lies, her plans. I needed her to trust him, to trust her secrets to me without even realizing it. I sat there for hours, listening, watching as they laughed, as they held hands, as they kissed like nothing else in the world mattered. I watched as she looked at him the way she used to look at me. I watched my wife fall in love with another man. When they finally left, I stayed behind, sitting in that car, staring at the empty cafe. The truth was out now, lay bare before me. She didn't just cheat on me. She betrayed me in every way possible. I felt hollow, like something inside me had died. But in that emptiness, something new was growing. Something cold, sharp, unrelenting. She wanted to destroy me, to take everything we built and burn it to the ground. Fine. If she wanted a war, I'd give her one. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. Her smile, her laughter, the way she looked at him. It was haunting me, twisting inside me like a knife. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in this web of lies. I needed to act, to take control. The next morning, I called Victor. It's time, I told him, my voice cold, steady. I need you to help me finish this. He didn't hesitate. I'll be there in an hour. True to his word, Victor arrived with a small black case. He opened it on my kitchen table, revealing a set of devices, tiny microphones, a GPS tracker, and something that looked like a flash drive. This will give you access to everything on her phone, texts, calls, even her location. You'll know exactly where she is and who she's talking to. I picked up the device, feeling the weight of it. It was so small, so unassuming. But it held all the power I needed. How do we do it? Victor's eyes were cold, calculating. You need to get her phone long enough for me to install the software. 5 minutes, that's all I need. It was easier than I expected. That evening, I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. She seemed surprised, even touched, like she still believed we were a normal couple. It made me sick. At the restaurant, she left her purse on the table. She went to the bathroom. I slipped the phone out, handed it to Victor, who was waiting outside, then took it back before she returned. She never noticed a thing. After dinner, she smiled at me, her eyes warm, her fingers lacing through mine. I missed this, she said softly. Just us. I smiled back, the lie slipping out easily. Me too. Inside, I was burning. How could she say that to me? After everything. After him. That night, Victor sent me the access codes. Her entire phone was now mine. I could see every message, hear every call, track every movement. There were no more secrets. I stayed up all night, reading through every text, listening to every voicemail. I forced myself to take in every word, every lie, every betrayal. She was so in love with him. So happy. She told him things she never told me. Shared dreams, secrets, promises of a future together. She was planning to leave me. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. As soon as they figured out how to make it work. They were talking about apartments, about starting fresh, about a life without me. I felt like I was suffocating. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was erasing me from her life, replacing me with him. The worst part was hearing her talk about me. Hearing her complain about our life, our marriage. He's so distant, she told Andre. We barely talk anymore. It's like living with a stranger. A stranger. That's what I was to her now. A stranger she was planning to leave behind without a second thought. I listened to every word, letting the pain sink in, letting the rage build. I needed to hear it, to feel it. to understand just how deep her betrayal went. And then I heard the call that shattered what little remained of my heart. She was crying, her voice shaky, vulnerable. I can't do this anymore, Andre. I can't keep lying to him. It's killing me. His voice was calm, soothing. Then don't. Leave him. Be with me. She hesitated, then whispered, I don't want to go home. I only want you. The line went silent. My mind went blank. She didn't want to come home. She didn't want me. She never wanted me. I felt something break inside me. Something cold, hard, unyielding. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was just an obstacle. Something standing between her and her happiness. Fine. If that's how she wanted it, then that's how it would be. I wasn't going to let her walk away. Not after everything she did. Not after all the lies, all the betrayal. She wanted to destroy our life. I'd show her what destruction really looked like. I deleted the call logs, erased my tracks, then went to bed, lying beside her as she slept peacefully, unaware of the war she had started. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about revenge. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I watched her closely. Every movement, every smile, every word was calculated, rehearsed. She played her role perfectly. Loving wife, caring partner, loyal friend. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her act. But I knew the truth now. I knew every lie, every secret, every whispered confession. And I was done playing the fool. She kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, her lips warm against mine, her smile soft and genuine. Have a good day, darling, she said, her voice sweet, affectionate. I forced myself to smile back. You too. The moment she was out the door, I checked her location. She was going to work, just like she said she would. But I knew better than to relax. She was meeting him today. I'd read the texts, heard the calls. They were planning lunch together, another stolen moment. I followed her, keeping my distance, tracking her every move. She was cautious, checking her surroundings, making sure no one followed her. But she never even glanced at my car. She didn't know this one, didn't know it was me behind the wheel. She parked 2 blocks away from the cafe, walking the rest of the distance. Andre was already waiting, leaning casually against his car, looking every bit the charming lover. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands gripping the steering wheel. They embraced, their bodies pressed close, their faces lighting up with joy. She laughed, her eyes sparkling, her voice soft and loving. She never looked at me like that anymore. I recorded everything, every word, every laugh, every touch. I needed the evidence, needed the proof. Not just for me, but for what came next. They walked inside, finding a quiet corner, hidden from prying eyes. But not from me. I was listening, hearing every word through the device Victor gave me. I missed you, she said, her voice low, tender. I hate being apart from you. Andre smiled, his hand reaching across the table to take hers. Not much longer, my love. Just a little more patience. She sighed, her fingers tightening around his. I don't know how much more of this I can take. Lying to him, pretending everything's fine. It's killing me. His expression softened, his voice gentle. Then end it. Leave him. Be with me. She hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know how. He's been good to me. He doesn't deserve this. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Didn't deserve this? She had the nerve to talk about what I deserved. After everything she did, Andre's gaze was steady, unwavering. You deserve to be happy. With me. She looked at him, her face softening, her eyes filling with tears. I love you, Andre. I really do. He leaned in, his voice low, soothing. Then choose me. Let's start over. Just us. My chest tightened, the air leaving my lungs. She was going to do it. She was really going to leave me. To throw away everything we built together. For him. I watched her make plans, watched her promise herself to him. And in that moment, I knew. There was no going back. I drove home, my mind racing, my heart pounding. I needed to move fast. She was slipping away, planning her escape, planning a future without me. I called Victor, my voice cold, firm. It's time. I need the next part. He didn't ask questions. He knew what this meant, knew where this was going. Meet me tonight. Usual place. I hung up, my hands shaking, my mind sharp, focused. It was time to end this. To end her lies, her betrayal. To end the life she tried to build without me. That night, I met Victor in a deserted parking lot. He handed me a new device, small, unassuming. This will record everything. Hide it in her car. You'll hear every conversation, track every movement. I took the device, feeling its weight, feeling the power it held. This was it. The final piece. The proof I needed. The weapon I'd use. Victor's eyes were dark, serious. Are you sure about this? I looked at him, my face hard, unyielding. She took everything from me. Now it's my turn. He nodded, his expression grim. Then make it count. I went home, my mind racing, my heart pounding. She was already asleep, curled up on her side, her face peaceful, innocent. I stood there, watching her, my chest tight, my hands trembling. I used to love her. Once upon a time, she was my whole world. But that was before the lies, before the betrayal, before she tried to erase me from her life. Now all I felt was hatred. Cold, sharp, unrelenting. I went to her car, moving quickly, quietly. I hid the device under the dashboard, out of sight, out of reach. She'd never find it. She'd never know. I went back inside, lying down beside her, my body tense, my mind racing. Tomorrow, she'd go to him again. Tomorrow, she'd betray me again. But this time, I'd hear everything. This time, I'd be ready. This time, she wouldn't get away with it. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness swallow me, letting the hatred consume me. Tomorrow, the game would change. Tomorrow, the revenge would begin. The next day was a test of patience. I watched her every move, my eyes fixed on her as she went about her morning routine, completely oblivious to the storm brewing right under her nose. She was cheerful, humming to herself as she made breakfast, her phone buzzing with messages, probably from him. I pretended to be distracted, scrolling through my own phone, but in reality, I was watching her reflection in the kitchen window, watching every smile, every glance at her screen. Her lies were getting bolder, more confident. She thought she was in control. I followed her from a distance, tracking her through the device I planted. She drove across town, careful and calculated, taking detours, checking her surroundings. She was getting more cautious, but it didn't matter. I knew exactly where she was going. She met him at a park this time, a secluded spot near the river, hidden from view. They sat under a tree, close, intimate. I stayed in my car, listening through the hidden microphone, hearing every word. I can't wait to get out of here, she whispered, her voice full of longing. To start over. Justice. Andre pulled her close, his voice low and soothing. It won't be long now. Just a little more patience, my love. She sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. I just hate going home to him, pretending everything's fine. It feels so wrong. I felt my jaw tighten, my fists clenching. She was talking about our home, our life, like it was some kind of prison. Like I was the villain keeping her trapped. Andre kissed her forehead, his voice soft. Selena, I promise. We'll be together. No more lies. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. I love you. The words felt like a slap in the face. She said them so easily, so freely. Like they meant everything. Like they were real. I turned off the recording, my chest tightening, my vision blurring. I couldn't listen anymore. Not today. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring around me, my mind racing. She was planning to leave me. To walk away without a second thought. To erase me from her life like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. I was her husband. And she wasn't going to get away with this. I went to Victor's place, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. He took one look at me and knew. You heard something. I nodded, my voice cold, flat. She's planning to leave me. For him. He didn't look surprised. You knew that already. I shook my head, my jaw tightening. Not like this. She's running away. Like I don't even matter. Victor leaned back, his eyes narrowing. And what are you planning to do about it? I met his gaze, my voice hard, unyielding. I want them to pay. Both of them. He was silent for a moment, studying me, his face unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. I have a way. But once you do this, there's no going back. I didn't hesitate. I don't want to go back. I want her to feel what I'm feeling. I want her to suffer. Victor's eyes were cold, calculating. All right, here's what you need to do. We spent hours planning, every detail precise, every step calculated. It had to be perfect. It had to hurt. By the time I got home, Lena was already asleep. I stood in the doorway, watching her, my chest tight, my hands trembling. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. I used to love her. Once, I would have done anything to protect her. Now, all I wanted was to watch her world burn. The next morning, she was quiet, thoughtful. She kept checking her phone, her face clouded with worry. She didn't know I had deleted her messages, erased all traces of his calls. She didn't know I was pulling the strings now. She left the house in a hurry, her movements rushed, frantic. I followed her, keeping my distance, watching as she tried to call him over and over, only to get no response. Her desperation was satisfying. She was losing control, losing the narrative she carefully crafted. I watched as she drove to his apartment, banging on his door, calling his name, only to be met with silence. She was breaking down, unraveling before my eyes, and I was just getting started. That night, she came home late, her eyes red, her face pale. She looked at me, her expression haunted, broken. I couldn't reach Andre today. He's not answering my calls. I acted surprised, concerned. That's strange. Maybe he's busy. She shook her head, her voice trembling. No, it's not like him. I'm worried something happened. I forced myself to look sympathetic, to play the role of the clueless husband. I'm sure he's fine. Maybe his phone died. She tried to smile, but it faltered. Yeah, maybe. I watched her crumble, watched her worry eat away at her. She was losing him, losing her grip on her perfect little fantasy. And it was all because of me. The next day, I listened to her phone calls, heard her desperation, her panic. She was calling everyone, searching for him, begging for answers. But there were none. Not anymore. I deleted his contact, erased their messages, blocked his number. As far as she was concerned, he had disappeared off the face of the earth. I watched as her world fell apart, as the lies she built came crashing down around her. She wanted to destroy me, to leave me without a second thought. Now it was her turn to feel that pain. This was only the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. I watched her spiral, her confidence crumbling, her perfect facade cracking. She was lost, desperate, clinging to fragments of a life that no longer existed. And I was the invisible hand guiding her downfall. She barely slept, her nights spent staring at her phone, hoping for a message that would never come. Her eyes were hollow, her smile forced, her laughter a brittle echo of what it used to be. She was slipping, falling into the void I created. I acted the part of the concerned husband, feigning ignorance, offering comfort. You've been so distant lately, I said, my voice soft, caring. Is everything all right? She looked at me, her eyes empty, lost. I don't know. I feel like I'm losing everything. I reached for her hand, my touch gentle, supportive. You're not losing me. I'm right here. She broke down, collapsing into my arms, her body shaking with sobs. I held her close, whispering words of comfort, hiding the cold satisfaction behind my mask of concern. She was breaking, just like she broke me. Every day she searched for him. She went to his apartment, his workplace, called his friends, even his family. But there was no trace of him. No answers, no explanations. Just silence. She started to doubt herself, her sanity unraveling. What if something happened to him? She whispered one night, her voice trembling. What if he's gone? I looked at her, my face carefully composed, my voice calm. People don't just disappear. I'm sure he's fine. Maybe he needed some space. Her eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking. But he wouldn't just leave without telling me. He wouldn't do that. I watched her break down, watched the hope drain from her eyes. She was losing herself, drowning in the consequences of her own betrayal. And it was all because of me. Victor checked in regularly, his voice cold, calculating. She's unraveling, just like you wanted. I nodded, my jaw tight. It's not enough. Not yet. He looked at me, his eyes sharp, assessing. What's the endgame here? How far are you planning to take this? I met his gaze, my voice hard, unwavering. As far as it takes. Until she's lost everything. Victor nodded, his face grim. Understood. We set the next stage in motion. It was time to twist the knife deeper. I left a note on her car, written in Andre's handwriting, a perfect replica. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Goodbye. She found it the next morning, her face going pale, her hands trembling. She collapsed against the car, her body shaking with sobs, her heart shattering right before my eyes. She thought he left her. Thought he abandoned her without a word, without an explanation. Just like she was planning to do to me. I watched her break, watched her world crumble, watched her heart shatter. And I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt. Only satisfaction. She spent the next few days in a daze, her body moving on autopilot, her mind elsewhere. She barely spoke, barely ate, barely existed. One night, I heard her crying in the bathroom, her sobs echoing off the walls, raw and broken. She was mourning him, mourning the life she thought she'd have, mourning the future she planned to build without me. I stood outside the door, listening to her heartbreak, letting the sound wash over me. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I was the reason for her pain, that I held her life in my hands, her sanity, her hope, her happiness. But she took everything from me first. She broke me, betrayed me, erased me from her heart. This was justice. This was revenge. The next day, she tried to reach out to his friends again, searching for answers, for closure. But Victor made sure no one would respond. As far as the world was concerned, Andre never existed. She came home late, her eyes red, her face pale. She looked at me, lost, defeated. I think he's gone for good. I don't think he's coming back. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, whispering words of comfort, pretending to be the caring husband she needed. I'm here. I'll always be here. She clung to me, her body shaking, her heart breaking. She was mine again, bound to me by her own despair, by the lies she told, by the love she lost. But it still wasn't enough. I needed her to confess, to admit her betrayal, to speak the words out loud, to acknowledge the pain she caused, the life she tried to destroy. Only then would my revenge be complete. Only then would she understand what it felt like to be me. I started planting seeds, subtle hints, gentle nudges. You've been so distant. It feels like you're not here anymore. Like you're somewhere else. She looked at me, guilt flashing in her eyes. I'm just dealing with some things. It's not you. I pushed harder, my voice soft, wounded. If there's something you need to tell me, if you've been unhappy, I just want to understand. Her face crumbled, her eyes filling with tears. She was close, so close to breaking. I don't know how to. I wrapped my arms around her, my voice gentle, loving. You can tell me anything. I'm your husband. I love you. She broke down, sobbing into my chest, her guilt consuming her. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. I held her tighter, my heart cold, my mind sharp. She was cracking, her lies crumbling, her mask slipping. She was falling apart. And I was right there to watch her shatter. It was time to end this. Time to bring everything to light. To force her to confront the truth she'd been running from. The next morning, I set the stage. I played my part perfectly, acting the concerned husband, the loving partner. I made her breakfast, brought her coffee, pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was preparing for the final act. I called Victor, our voices low measured. It's time. Do it today. He didn't hesitate. Understood. Consider it done. Lena was distracted all morning, her eyes distant, her thoughts far away. She was still searching for him, still clinging to the hope that he would come back. I watched her, my heart cold, detached. She had no idea what was coming. That afternoon, her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, her face going pale, her eyes widening. It was a message from Andre's number. Meet me at our spot. We need to talk. Her hands were shaking, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She looked at me, panic flickering in her eyes. Ah, I have to go out for a while. Something came up. I pretended to be concerned. Are you okay? You look upset. She forced a smile, her voice trembling. I'm fine. Just, just something I need to take care of. I watched her leave, my expression carefully neutral, my heart pounding. It was all falling into place. I followed her at a distance, my car blending into traffic, invisible, unnoticed. She was driving fast, reckless, desperate. She was going to him. She arrived at the park, the same place they always met. She got out of the car, her eyes searching, her face hopeful, anxious. She was waiting for him, expecting him to walk out of the trees, to take her in his arms, to explain everything. But he never came. I watched from a distance as she stood there, waiting, her hope fading, her face crumbling. She looked at her phone, read the message again, over and over, her body trembling. Minutes passed, then an hour. She was breaking, shattering, her world collapsing. I stepped out of my car, my footsteps slow, deliberate. She turned around, her eyes widening as she saw me standing there, my face cold, emotionless. Alexei, what are you doing here? Her voice was weak, shaking. I took a step closer, my eyes fixed on her, unblinking. I could ask you the same thing. She looked away, guilt flashing across her face. Ah, I just needed some air. To think. I laughed, the sound cold, hollow. To think, or to wait for him. Her eyes snapped back to me, her face going pale. Ah, I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out her phone, holding it up so she could see the screen. The message was still there, glaring, undeniable. Her eyes widened, her face crumbling. Oh, how did you? I stepped closer, my voice low, deadly. I know everything, Lena. Every lie, every betrayal. Every time you looked me in the eye and pretended to love me. She took a step back, her body trembling. Alexei, I never meant to hurt you. I laughed again, the sound bitter, broken. Never meant to hurt me? You destroyed me. You threw away our life, our marriage for him. And you never even looked back. Tears filled her eyes, her hands shaking. I was confused. I didn't know how to tell you. I never wanted to. I cut her off, my voice sharp, cold. You never wanted to. You wanted to run away. To leave me without a word. You wanted to erase me like I was nothing. She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, her face crumpling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I watched her break down, her guilt consuming her, her lies unraveling. She was falling apart, and I felt nothing. I pulled out the recorder, pressing play. Her own voice filled the air, her whispered confession echoing around us. I don't want to go home. I only want you. Her face went white, her eyes widening in horror. No, no. How did you? I stepped closer, my face hard, unyielding. I heard everything. I watched everything. Every time you were with him, every lie you told, every time you smiled at me knowing you were betraying me. She collapsed to her knees, her body shaking, her hands covering her face. Alexei, please. I never meant for this to happen. I looked down at her, my heart cold, my voice flat. You did this to yourself. You made your choice, and now you get to live with the consequences. She sobbed, her body crumbling, her spirit breaking. She was shattered, destroyed, ruined. And it still wasn't enough. I turned away, my footsteps echoing as I walked back to my car. She called after me, her voice desperate, pleading. Alexei, please, don't leave me. I didn't look back. She was already gone. I drove away, the city lights blurring around me, my heart hollow, empty. I had my revenge. I destroyed her, took away everything she loved, everything she dreamed of. But it didn't bring me peace. It didn't fix what she broke. I was still empty, still lost. I pulled over, my hands shaking, my chest tightening. I thought revenge would set me free, that would heal the wounds she left behind. But it didn't. It just left me hollow, broken. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, saw the man I had become, the darkness in my eyes, the coldness in my heart. She destroyed me. But in the end, I destroyed myself. And there was no going back.